compared to recent days. 21 Celsius, meanwhile, in the east of England, and certainly an improvement here compared to recent days. But the cloud and the rain in the west tends to push eastwards, fading away, so not much to it by the end of the night. And then, increasingly, the cloud breaks up. Still the potential for some showers in the far southeast and the far northwest, but in between clear spells and a keen breeze, that wind starting to get stronger all the while. And, of course, with that wind in place, it's not going to be a cool start to Friday. For many places, we'll look at the morning lows at 13 to 15 Celsius. So a blustery day to come tomorrow. Plenty of bright weather. For much of England and Wales, it stays dry. There'll be sunny spells, but it will be noticeably breezy. And that wind particularly strong towards the northwest. And for Western Scotland, the risk of gales around exposed coasts. The showers will be lively as well for Western Scotland and Northern Ireland. Risk of hail and thunder. Similar conditions on Saturday with frequent showers towards the northwest, along with a strong wind and gales for exposed coasts. Brighter skies for the rest of the UK, but breezy and feeling cool.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
A very good morning and welcome to this, The Briefing, with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Today, it's policy, policy, policy on The Briefing. With the Prime Minister expected to make a landmark speech later today, we'll explore what he needs to say to get the country back to growth. Is his housing plan enough? What more policy does he need to explore? We'll talk about it all on The Briefing after this.
Good morning, it's 9:31. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister is set to announce plans for lower paid workers to use housing benefits to buy their homes. Boris Johnson will make a speech in Lancashire later and is expected to say he'll extend the right to buy scheme for housing association tenants. The average price to fill up a typical family car is expected to exceed £100 for the first time. It's after the biggest daily jump in petrol prices for 17 years. On Tuesday, the RAC reported a litre of petrol cost an average of 101 pence and a litre of diesel cost an average of 187 pence. A government-commissioned review into smoking, due to be published today, could raise the legal smoking age in the UK to 21. Rates have come down significantly since the 1970s, but there are still an estimated 7 million smokers across the UK. The government's determined to deliver on its manifesto pledge to have a smoke-free Britain by 2030, which means getting prevalence down to 5% or less. Experts are warning that shortages in cancer doctors across the country could lead to delays in patients getting diagnosed. A report by the Royal College of Radiologists shows a 17% shortfall of specialists across the UK, which could increase to 26% in the next 4 years. And the number of jobs offering a 4-day week has gone up by 90%. Job site CV Library says the charity sector, sales, catering and distribution have seen the biggest rise in adverts. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to the briefing with Tom.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:33 and this is the briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and DAB radio. Now, the Prime Minister is poised to try to reverse the political discontent of his backbenchers today with a policy blitz aimed at easing the cost of living and housing crisis, which he will tease in a speech scheduled for this afternoon. Boris Johnson is set to announce a new vision, complete with a plan to tackle spiralling prices and potentially taxes, while delivering on the government's overriding mission to, quote, unite and level up the country. Well, will he be able to do that, or will it just be another speech full of sound bites? Let's explore the options now with Annabel Denham, Director of Communications at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Welcome to the programme, Annabel. I suppose, first of all, we've been hearing a lot of hints about what the Prime Minister may be saying today, but we're not expecting all that much detail.
No, that's quite right, Tom. And let's not forget that this is coming off the back of an emergency budget, which itself was only a couple of months after the spring statement, which itself was only a couple of months after Operation Red Meat was launched to try and keep the electorate on side when those Partygate allegations first emerged. So we've had lots of sound bites, we've had lots of rhetoric, but very little in the way of detail over the past few months. Perhaps today will be an opportunity for the Prime Minister to put some meat on the bones, though I'm a little sceptical in terms of what he needs to do. I think the first thing to say is that the Conservative Party, the government, need a complete rethink of their current approach. It's very clear that in the battle of ideas, the government has entered the arena unarmed. If it's not cribbing from the Labour Party with measures such as windfall taxes, then it's just following a path of incessant, knee-jerk, feel-good policy making, and it leads to a very muddled overall strategy and a complete lack really of a longer term economic plan. It's not clear to me whether this Conservative government is committed to hiking taxes or to lowering them, but let's not forget that it's raised taxes more in the last 3 years than Gordon Brown did when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer. It's creating huge uncertainty for businesses which don't know whether corporation tax is going to be hiked, for instance, in 2023 or not, or whether in the event of above expected profits, they may be facing a windfall tax. So, you know, at the moment, it's just not clear what this government stands for. It's come under fire for being more social democratic than it is conservative. And in terms of what Boris Johnson needs to do today, he needs to set out a longer term economic plan for the country and really bring the party back to its Conservative roots.
I suppose what the Prime Minister would say in response to that is that there has been an unprecedented set of crises befalling his prime ministership. Of course, there was first COVID struck down upon the whole world, and then next a war in Europe. He hasn't been the most fortunate Prime Minister. These events have changed the outlook, and the government hasn't really known how to deal with them. I suppose when we're looking beyond these twin sets of crises, this will be almost the first opportunity the government has, outside of immediate reactive policy, to set something proactive.
Yes, it's right. It's a fair analysis to say that in the last 5-6 years, we've had a succession of black swan events. Just as Brexit was getting over the line, we were struck with the pandemic. Just as the final restrictions were lifted, the war in Ukraine broke out. So it's certainly been a difficult time for any government. But, as Reagan used to say, there are no easy solutions, but there are simple ones. The Conservative Party, the government needs to look at ways of cutting taxes. It needs to drastically reduce government spending. And if it's unwilling to do that because it's got concerns over the amount of fiscal headroom, because it's got concerns over inflation and pouring fuel onto that fire if it borrows more, then at the very least, it should embark on a programme of massive deregulation. How long, Tom, have we been promised that governments will ignite the bonfire of red tape? And yet here we are still waiting. There's swathes of regulations that are driving up the cost of living for people in childcare. It leads to us having one of about the second highest childcare costs in the OECD. Of course, the government is announcing some changes on the housing front today, but it's not tackling the underlying issue that we have too much demand and too little supply and it does seem reluctant to embark on a programme of planning liberalisation. And of course, in energy as well, the successive governments over the last 20 years or so have meddled in the energy market to such an extent that it scarcely resembles a market at all anymore. And none of that's to mention employment legislation, with the government constantly seeming to flirt with the idea of imposing more rules on businesses around flexible working, hybrid working, right to disconnect. These sorts of things, which may work for some businesses, but will nonetheless tie them up in yet more red tape. So if it's unwilling to slash taxes, as I suspect it will be, then it could at the very least look at ways of deregulating the economy.
We keep hearing about how the government wants to cut taxes, wants to do it, but the new phrase that we've been hearing from number 10 and indeed number 11 is that they will only do so when it's responsible to do so. I wonder how much of this is, in their minds, to do with the risks of looser policy, of higher spending or indeed lower taxes in the environment of almost double-digit inflation. In a worrying sort of way, the sort of policies that will boost growth are also the sorts of policies that might make inflation even worse.
Well, there's certainly a concern among government that if they continue to borrow because they're slashing taxes, they're not getting that revenue pouring into the Treasury coffers through the taxes that are levied, then it will be borrowing, that they'll have to borrow more in order, print more money, pour more stimulus into the economy in order to keep things ticking over, just to keep things standing still. Now, separate to all of this, of course, is the conversations that we've been having over recent weeks about the Bank of England and the part that it has played in allowing inflation to spiral. And certainly the government of the Bank of England needs to get very serious about managing people's inflationary expectations. He ought to be, I would think, in raising interest rates even more than he has been, to send a signal that the Bank of England is serious about bringing down inflation and to prevent us from getting into a spiral where people are insisting on higher wages, which leads to higher prices, which leads to people insisting that they get higher wages. That is absolutely not a situation in which we want to find ourselves. But that's a question for the Bank of England and the sorts of levers that they are able to pull. But no, I absolutely believe that the government must, on the one hand, look at ways of slashing taxes, because let's not forget, Tom, that the highest cost of living for most people is the tax that they are currently paying through direct taxes, income tax, or through indirect taxes, such as the duties that they're paying on a wide range of areas, VAT or fuel duty, and of course an array of sin taxes as well that significantly drive up the cost of living. So the government needs to look at ways of slashing that. And then on the other side of the ledger, it needs to identify ways of cutting government spending. I think it's all very well saying that we've got this demographic demographic time bomb that's ticking away. The government is going to have to commit to continuing to pour money into social care and into healthcare. But at some point, it has got to go line by line through all areas of government spending and really ask whether that is money that is being invested in a sensible way.
I suppose the tricky thing here, of course, is that none of these solutions are easy. They're politically contentious. And how much does the Prime Minister want to get himself into a politically contentious situation just days after that confidence vote? Well, it's not long to wait until we hear exactly what he has to say a little bit later today. But for now, Annabel Denham, Director of Communications at the IEA, thanks so much for joining us this morning. But if we dive a little bit deeper into that policy blitz, one of the areas that we know a little bit about what the Prime Minister will say this afternoon is housing. It's set to be top of the agenda for the Prime Minister, who's set to announce a revival of sorts of Thatcher's Right to Buy scheme. Every year, the government spends around £20 billion on housing benefits, which is expected to rise to a whopping £30 billion later this year. Well, the scheme, popular in the 80s, Right to Buy that is, it aims to give millions the ability to buy their social properties at discounts of up to 70% of market price. So this is moving Help to Buy from those, as it existed in council houses, to social housing too. Well, what will be the benefits, or indeed the drawbacks, of this policy? I'm delighted to be joined now by James Prestwich, Director of Policy and External Affairs at the Chartered Institute of Housing. Welcome to the programme. First of all, we do know quite a few details about this policy. It was first, or a version of it, was announced in the 2015 Conservative manifesto. It was trialled and then stalled, and now it seems to be being revived outside of its trial area. What do we know?
You've summed things up really well there, Tom. This has been in train for quite some considerable time, from the 2015 manifesto onwards. There was a large-scale pilot that was carried out across the Midlands 3 or 4 years ago, and the lessons that were learned from that pilot told us, I think, really that actually, as policy goes, this isn't a great one. Certainly not in terms of the use of public money. So we've got about 1.1 million people on waiting lists at the moment for social housing. So I would suggest that any plan to sell off such a scarce commodity doesn't make a lot of sense, and that it would make far greater sense for that money that would otherwise be funding discounts to go into building more social homes. That is the fundamental nature of the housing crisis that we face here across the UK. We simply aren't building enough homes. We need to do more of that as opposed to selling off the crown jewels.
Yeah, so I suppose the government would say in response to that is that within its policy it's announcing today, it is promising to like for like replace the homes that are sold, unlike what happened in the 1980s with the first iteration of Right to Buy. This would be one that replaces the stock that is sold. I suppose it doesn't do a lot to do with supply, but does that assuage some concerns in that area?
To a degree, yes. So the pilot that took place in the Midlands that I mentioned in my previous answer also had an element of looking to replace on a one-for-one basis. That wasn't necessarily a like-for-like basis. And without trying to get too technical, what that meant was that homes that would be replacing the homes that were sold wouldn't necessarily be homes that were at the same more affordable social rents. Often they were at more expensive affordable rents, which is quite an important distinction here. And often the homes that would be replacing the homes sold wouldn't be of the same type. They would be smaller, less bedrooms. So there are some real challenges, I think, for government to be able to demonstrate very clearly that Right to Buy, or revamped Right to Buy for housing associations, would deliver like-for-like, one-for-one replacement. I think that's one of the key challenges here. I think the other point that's worth making is housing associations and this revamped Right to Buy would be for housing associations and housing association tenants. It is a particular issue because housing associations are already building at scale quite a number of homes. So it's particularly important that those homes that were already going to be delivered wouldn't count as replacements for homes that were sold because there's no additionality there at all.
And I suppose supply is the biggest issue here. I do want to, just in our last minute of this conversation, show a graph from the New Statesman magazine. It shows the growth of house prices compared to the growth of average wages. And right up until the early, or indeed the late 1990s, house price growth tracked wage growth. And then something happened at the end of the 1990s, which sent house prices exploding, booming upwards many, many times that the growth of wages. Buying a house now is just fundamentally a different experience to what it was in the 1990s or even early 2000s. This is a phenomenon of simply not building enough.
Absolutely, yes. So we've carried out analysis with others that say we really need to be building around 340,000 new homes a year to keep pace with demand. Government have their own target of around 300,000 homes a year. But fundamentally, this is a failure of successive governments to design a housing system that works for all and to build enough homes. And that graph really indicates the fundamental challenge that we have here, that break, the break between earnings and house prices.
Well, James Prestwich, Director of Policy and External Affairs at the Chartered Institute of Housing. It's been a fascinating discussion. Really appreciate your time this morning. Thanks for joining us. Now, finally today, let's take a comment from the co-author of the 2019 Tory Party manifesto. This is a comment from Rachel Wolfe that caught my eye just yesterday, who wrote that of all the policies that could deliver economic growth, there's a clear winner among lots of right-of-centre policy people, that is. It's called the Oxford-Cambridge arc. Yet the government's been accused of abandoning this policy. Now, if you're unfamiliar, the Oxford-Cambridge arc is a vision to link up the hugely significant area between Oxford, Milton Keynes and Cambridge. It's a sort of geographical arc, if you will. The area currently generates around £110 billion a year, but has the potential to grow much faster if it's all linked up and allowed to develop. Well, let's get stuck into all of this with Stian Westlake, Senior Fellow at Nesta, the UK's National Foundation for Innovation, and an advisor to the Minister for Science, Innovation and Universities. Welcome to the programme. Thanks for joining us in the studio. There's been a lot of contentious discussion over the Oxford-Cambridge arc. There was a plan for a railway, a plan for a road. The road has been ditched. Has the whole concept of the arc been ditched?
Well, as far as we can see, it's really been put on the back burner. There was a big consultation that finished in October of last year. Since then, it seems to have been deprioritised by the government. And I think that's leaving everyone involved in this project thinking, does the government care about this anymore? It's a real challenge.
Now, lots of people say that this particular project could be the big driver for growth. It could be the big key policy that actually generates a better quality of living for everyone in the country. Why does this particular area have such a potential to grow the economy?
Well, one thing we know, if we look around the world, if we look at Silicon Valley, if we look at Boston in the US, if we look at Israel, is that if you've got lots of smart people doing great research, if you make it easy to build houses and offices near those people, the magic of the free market will do its thing, people will set up businesses, and economic growth will happen. Now, this is fantastic, so long as you allow people to build. And one of the tragedies of the UK is we channel lots and lots of public funding into two very beautiful towns, Oxford and Cambridge, surrounded by tight green belts where it is almost impossible to build anything. Now, the arc is an attempt, it's a sort of second-best attempt to say, how do you solve that? By allowing people to build some things in between Oxford and Cambridge, Milton Keynes, Bedford, link it up, as you say, with roads and rail, so that it gets easier for entrepreneurs to set up the things they want to. That's why it's so important.
So it's a second-best approach. Instead of making Oxford and Cambridge megacities, it's about sort of having dots of places to live in between and pretty good transport. I suppose the issue here with the United Kingdom's planning system as it is people can object to things being built near them. Not on their land, but near them. And lots of people who live between Oxford and Cambridge have been voicing their opposition to this project, and potentially this is why the government has got cold feet.
That's exactly right. I mean, this is a challenging thing politically. If you're an MP for a constituency, if you're a local councillor in that arc, From your point of view, you might be much happier if everyone just forgets this. That's obviously great for people who live in the individual places to avoid disruption. But if what we care about is the economic future of the UK, stopping stagnation, raising wages, then something needs to be done.
Now, another criticism that may be levelled against the Ark is that this is a very southern thing. You can't get much more southern than Oxford and Cambridge in an arc that orbits London. In the context of levelling up, where the government wants to generate growth and opportunities for the whole of the United Kingdom, not just the South East, how does the arc fit into that?
I think there's two ways it works. The first is it makes it easier to move. At the moment, it's very difficult to move to Cambridge unless you're on an incredibly high salary because it's so expensive. If you can build more or allow people to build more, it makes the benefits of Cambridge, which we all fund, taxpayers across the UK fund the research there, it makes that more accessible. That's one option. I mean, the other question is, if you really say, well, you don't want this stuff to happen in Oxford and Cambridge, then you have to think differently about where you fund university research. But it seems to me that that's off the table. So if that is off the table, then we need to think about how we can build more in and around these two places.
How does economic growth in Oxford and in Cambridge and in the arc between them, how does that help the rest of the country?
So, a few things. Firstly, it generates more tax revenue, can provide more investment in public services and so forth. It provides jobs that other people can come and do. And these businesses have supply chains. They create opportunities for suppliers around the country. We know that a lot of these benefits stay in country. So holding back the most potentially productive parts of your country are going to do a disservice not just to those parts, but to everyone.
So if we're looking at this potential rail project, which has not yet been cancelled despite the vociferal opposition of those who live between those two cities, what's the progress here? When are the next points of contention? What are we going to see in reality happen with this project in the near future?
I think we're all waiting for the next announcements from the Department for Levelling Up, who are very important in this. I don't know when those are going to come, but I think the next 2 months could be crucial for this. It will be really valuable to hear in the PM's coming plan for growth a real commitment to saying we're not going to drop this, we're going to do something here.
Now, there are lots of things that the United Kingdom government could do to spur growth. It's clear that an easy and probably low-cost version is the Oxford-Cambridge arc. But what are the other areas that the United Kingdom government should be looking at to try and get up our sclerotic growth due to be the second lowest in the G20 next year?
So one thing that is very achievable in the next 18 months is something very politically possible for the government to do that literally focuses on the same Oxford and Cambridge question, is you could simply grant planning permission for a square mile outside Cambridge and build a new city. That would be entirely possible. It's entirely within the government's planning. It's not going to be politically popular in Cambridge, but it's going to create huge benefits to the wider economy.
And I suppose Cambridge is an area trending against the government anyway, but potentially they're not going to win an area within that square. A square mile is quite a small place for a city. Is that enough?
You can fit a lot of houses into that kind of area. You can build, those of you who've got a historical mindset will think of Edinburgh Newtown, built in the 18th century, to this kind of beautiful Georgian design. You could build Cambridge Newtown in some of the fields outside Cambridge are pretty kind of nondescript agricultural fields. You wouldn't be losing a lot of natural beauty.
It's not green, it's ploughed.
And you could, I mean, that would, Cambridge at the moment is a city of about 125,000 people. Cambridge could be a city of 1 million people and could power UK economic growth into the next decade. Huge opportunity if the government wants to grasp it.
Wow, well, what a profound offer. Let's hope that someone from the Department for Levelling Up has been listening and that they may take this up. Well, Stian Westlake, thank you so much for joining us on the briefing this morning. It's been a really fascinating discussion, really worthwhile to have in the context of everything going on today as well. Well, that's it for the briefing today. Coming up from 10, it's To The Point with Patrick Christys. But first, here's your weather forecast.
Hello, a very good morning to you. I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Fine at first today, sunny spells in the south and then later in the day the east as well. But rain is expected to move in from the west. That rain because of a series of weather fronts that are approaching from the west as we speak. Low pressure carrying those fronts. Used to be a tropical storm, ex-tropical storm Alex. No longer a tropical storm, just an area of low pressure in the Atlantic. But it will bring some windy weather during tomorrow and Saturday especially. Before that happens, actually, we keep the sunny skies across much of central and eastern England, parts of southwest Scotland, Cumbria as well through much of the day. Some showers will develop after a cloudy start in the east of Scotland as well as the far northeast of England. The more persistent rain arrives into western areas, and 16, 17 Celsius for Plymouth and Cardiff will feel quite cool compared to recent days. 21 Celsius, meanwhile, in the east of England, and certainly an improvement here compared to recent days. But the cloud and the rain in the west tends to push eastwards, fading away, so not much to it by the end of the night. And then, increasingly, the cloud breaks up. Still the potential for some showers in the far southeast and the far northwest, but in between clear spells and a keen breeze, that wind starting to get stronger all the while. And, of course, with that wind in place, it's not going to be a cool start to Friday. For many places, we'll look at the morning lows at 13 to 15 Celsius. So a blustery day to come tomorrow. Plenty of bright weather. For much of England and Wales, it stays dry. There'll be sunny spells, but it will be noticeably breezy. And that wind particularly strong towards the northwest. And for Western Scotland, the risk of gales around exposed coasts. The showers will be lively as well for Western Scotland and Northern Ireland. Risk of hail and thunder. Similar conditions on Saturday with frequent showers towards the northwest, along with a strong wind and gales for exposed coasts. Brighter skies for the rest of the UK, but breezy and feeling cool.
Join me, Gloria De Piero, Monday to Thursday at noon for The Briefing. We go to the parts of Parliament that you won't see elsewhere. Plus, there's exclusive interviews with MPs from all parties.
But quite often, they paper over the real truth. Why does a working class lad like you join the Tories?
That's a good question.
Don't miss it, Monday to Thursdays at noon on GB News.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace